won't be speaking as at length as the other speakers, but I do want to talk about a few individuals that I think are important to know about and are interesting to me for a variety of reasons. I would like to open this talk, I think maybe half of this can be me talking about them, but I would like also some Socratic engagement from you guys, and just for everybody to kind of feel free to chime in when there's a question out in the room. So I'd like to open up today with this question, which is, who do you admire and why do you admire them? Anybody have anybody that comes to mind? No admiration for anybody. Everybody else is dead to us.
Living or dead?
Anybody, living or dead.
Kurt Vonnegut.
Why?
Brilliant writer, succinct, biting wit.
Why do you care that he's a writer?
His stories had a huge impact, and as any good fiction writer would do, his fictional work described reality oftentimes better than nonfiction would.
Awesome. Anybody else? Just any historical figure, family member, like somebody that you admire and what you admire about them?
David Lynch.
Lynch. Why? What do you admire about David Lynch?
He was unapologetic and didn't try to explain his works. He put them out there and let them stand for themselves.
Awesome. I like that.
Have you heard of Saint Maximilian Kolbe?
No.
I'm a big fan of him. He was a Catholic priest who, in Auschwitz, they were being tortured in the concentration camps for months. And one day the captain stood them in line to decide who was going to die that day because somebody had escaped or something, had broken the rules. So they had to kill somebody if they're, And he, the man who was chosen, started weeping because he had a wife and kids. And so Kolbe said, "Put me in his place." And then, and so his punishment was starvation for like 2 weeks. And the men who were in his starvation bunker, he kept their spirits high until they died, singing and all kinds of stuff, like defying the Nazis. So he's just been such a hero to me lately because he gave his life for something. And for somebody else, for a friend, he did the ultimate sacrifice, so that's been really inspiring to me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
Can I do two?
no.
Just one?
Of course you can do two.
I thought about it, and honestly, the first one would be my grandmother Tilly, who had the courage and the balls, proverbially, to leave communist Romania and come to the States.
Yeah.
And bring us over, and enduring that hellhole, waiting in line, queues, 3-hour-long queues for food, and then freezing cold, winter, foot got frostbite, her toe got bent permanently.
Wow.
So she had the endurance and fortitude to endure Romania and the vision to reach out to her brother in South Florida, my Uncle Remus, who brought us over to the States. I mean, that took a lot of guts, a lot of vision and strength.
Amazing.
So I just, if I can have half her courage and passion and joy of life, she's very vivacious and generous woman. And I guess the second one would be Tolkien. Enduring World War I, all the hells of the trenches that he went through, and then writing something as brilliant as Lord of the Rings, and his love of language and his understanding of the deep human condition and making architects cool before we knew what that word meant.
Yeah. Fantastic. Anybody else? Just somebody you admire and a reason why you admire them.
I really like Joe Allen.
I can't stand that guy.
Oh, Hank.
So,
buddy.
so I kind of start with that just to preface that, today I will speak about two people who I admire. I think it's important for us to have admiration. Well, for one, for the people around us. Hopefully, I admire all of my friends. There's something admirable about all of them, or I don't want to be friends with them. So every single person that I spend time with, I admire something about them. And they make me better. I admire my family members, my father, my mother, but there's also people throughout history who I admire. And even though I'll never meet them, and there's a gap, a distance of time and culture and tradition, there is still a way that we can reach these people through literature. And it helps us kind of break that gap between where we are and where they are. So I think admiring historical figures, I think every guy should find, one or two people throughout history who lived their life in a certain way, who had characteristics that they think are valuable, who did something that they think is heroic. And I think that we should pick somebody and study them and get to know them. And through that, I believe that we can adopt parts of their personality. Human mimicry is a very powerful thing. Psychologists are talking about it now. But we mimic the people who we're with, and if we study people, we begin to subconsciously mimic their behavior as well. So it's kind of like a little cheat code. If you want to be like Ben Franklin, read about Ben Franklin. If you want to be about Thomas Jefferson, read about Thomas Jefferson. If you want to be like Joe Allen, you can read Joe Allen.
Mm-hmm.
So another question I want to ask, I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on role models and heroes. Do you have a big place in your heart for heroes? Are there any people who you would call heroes of yours? Are those the same people who you said that you admire? Are these different things? What do you guys think about the role of having a hero in your life?
I'd say my heroes are folks that faced adversity and did it with class. Like Val mentioned his grandmother. I think about my great whoever Grandpa Z who came over, same scenario. Instead of taking what was given to him and suffering in silence, he decided to do something that would, with quiet fortitude, but something that would affect generations behind him.
Anybody else? Anybody have any thoughts on heroes?
Just personally, and this probably applies to a lot of other people in the room, we grew up in a soup of anti-heroes and the demonization of heroes, at least the classical ones. And so it's hard to kind of pull out of that and have a proper respect for heroes without falling to the opposite of hero worship.
I think you bring up a fantastic point. We do a weekly study club for Meriwether in Nashville every Wednesday morning. And on Wednesday, somebody brought up, we're talking about masculinity and culture. And Peter Griffin and Homer Simpson came up in the conversation. It's like, how did our role models go from, the heroic age of the generals of the wars that came before us, and then, in the media you had these strong men, and then all of a sudden the most popular shows on television have these men who are absolutely incapable of any sort of executive function. And there's a long conversation that we had about that. But I think that we have to be careful with who we spend time with and who we absorb through the media, because that mimicry process can go both ways. I think if you spend your whole life watching Homer Simpson and Peter Griffin, you may end up like Homer Simpson and Peter Griffin. So, hilarious shows, but still, I wouldn't want to be one of those guys. So today, I want to talk about a pretty incredible person. I think he's probably one of the most interesting founding fathers. Surely the most brilliant, if not one of the smartest men to ever walk the earth, yet somehow also strangely the most relatable, which is kind of a paradox, but it's an interesting one. And I'm talking about Ben Franklin. So Benjamin Franklin, he was born in 1706 in Boston, Massachusetts. He was the youngest son of a man who had 17 children. And that man was also a tallow soap maker. So not necessarily the type of profession you would imagine somebody having 17 kids, but I guess you just did what you had to do. So Ben Franklin, he was the youngest son of the youngest son of the youngest son of the youngest son, going back like 4 generations. And he notes that in his autobiography. So, you know, my talk will kind of talk about some of the interesting things about his life, but I will stick, for the most part, to the narrative that he kind of puts in this book. Everybody should have gotten a copy of this if you're an attendee. This is probably one of the most important pieces of American literature ever written, in my eyes. It certainly is a lens into a man's life who lived an incredible life, who came from nothing, who was one of 17 children born into poverty and indentured servitude, and now he's on a $100 bill. So we're talking about a journey from absolutely nothing to absolutely everything. Now what's interesting about this book, the content itself is worth admiring, but also the framework, the reason why it was written. The first half of this book was not written as an autobiography. It was written as a letter to his son. So think about that. You know, what better context could you imagine for really getting the juice out of what a man thinks about life from that man writing to his son? I think there's something really, really special about that. So the first half or so of this book, he started writing it in 1777, somewhere around there, maybe a little bit later. And it was a letter to his son. And then he put the pen down for a while, got busy as life got busy in America around that time. And he would continue writing around late 1780s. And this narrative essentially goes from his birth up until the 1750s or the 1760s. And it's an unfinished autobiography. Another side note, I like tangents when I talk, by the way. I'll go on a lot of side notes, but unfinished books are fascinating to me. You have Francis Bacon, New Atlantis, unfinished book. Benjamin Franklin's autobiography, unfinished book. Thomas Jefferson's autobiography, unfinished book. There's something alluring and mysterious about an unfinished book that I've always found to be cool. So this is one of those. This is an unfinished book. So Franklin starts, he's writing a letter to his son, and then he kind of looks at his letters and he's like, all right, well, maybe I could turn this into a book. And he writes the rest of it with the context in mind that he's writing this for the next generation. And it is just full of life lessons. It's the type of book you would imagine somebody would write if they were trying to convey everything that they learned from life to somebody coming up in the world. So we'll kind of go through some of these items. You know, in the beginning, it's interesting. So he starts with his family history. Has anybody ever gone down like a big tangent down their family tree, figuring out where their blood is from? What was that experience like for you when you kind of cracked that world open? I'd love to hear.
Just seeing which foreign lands they came from, and knowing, like, holy shit, they were there during some really tough. No wonder they left, you know. And so what, all the adversity that resulted in them, you know, some from here, some from there, yet they landed here, and then even that bunch met more adversity. More like the just sort of relating to, like, if I go through something that really sucks, and I think, well, man, that wasn't as bad as Grandpa Cruz went through, you know, things like that.
Yeah, definitely. Context. Anybody else? Just thoughts on family histories?
I was amazed to find my family had been in America for so long. I was amazed that we had so many poor, nobody dirt farmers in North Carolina. You know, and I got really wondering what were their stories, right? Because, like, I don't come from a line of gentlemen that were leaving autobiographies. It was just like, how am I going to, you know, aside from, like, baptismal marriage and death records, there's not a lot, you know? And so it got me wondering, how am I going to actually learn my ancestors' stories? I mean, you know, maybe I'll find out a way, maybe I won't, you know?
Certainly, yeah. Anybody have any thoughts on?
I think for me, I trace my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather settled Nashville with John Robertson and was scalped by Indians for his efforts. And just seeing that the short amount of time from settling the frontier to where I am now, and the utter difference in the way we lived, was just blew my mind. Yeah, America is very young.
Yeah, my personal experience, I knew a little bit about my family tree growing up. I had an aunt who was like the crazy old aunt, and she was like, always had a camcorder, like everywhere we went. She'd have this camcorder, and she just had like a basement full of like VCR tapes, right? And she's the crazy old aunt growing up. But now, like, I realized that she was like cataloging our family, and she was big into our family tree. My family, the Steurys, we came over from Switzerland. We were farmers in Switzerland. We leave Switzerland in 1871. We go through New York. We go to Indiana. We live as Mennonites in Indiana, and then my great-grandfather was excommunicated from that Mennonite community for stubbornness. And he went up to Michigan, and then years later, I was born in Michigan. So as I kind of, learned about that, it gave me a sense of, I would say, wholesome pride. It also explained some things about myself. I was like, I come from Mennonites. Maybe that's why some of these interests that I have, it's almost like it wasn't a choice of mine. It was like I was supposed to be interested in these things. So I say all that because he opens this letter to his son with his family history. He tells his son about where the Franklins are from, how long the Franklins were there, when the Franklins came to America, and he opens with that. And I think that is just an interesting note, that he started with wanting his son to know where he came from. And I think that we have to know where we come from if we want to know where we are and where we're going. And there is an effort now to destroy the idea of where we come from. So he wanted his son to know where he came from. So he starts kind of writing this story, and some of the more notable parts. So Franklin was a very prolific man. He was a writer, and he really started writing when he was a teenager, 11, 12, 13 years old. So his father was this soap maker. Ben had a brother who had a print shop, and Ben actually signed indentured servitude papers to work at his brother's print shop. So Ben goes and starts working at his brother's print shop. I think he's got like a 7-year contract. So he's like 13 at the time. He'll be out of his contract when he's 20. And, Ben essentially starts writing anonymous submissions to the newspaper in Boston and slipping them under the door of the print shop at night, because he knows his brother is never going to publish his work because he's, the little brother, right? And he tried to get his brother to publish things, but he doesn't pay any attention to it. So he says, all right, I'll write this anonymously, slip it under the door and see if it gets published. And they started getting published. So Ben has this whole history of when he's like 13 years old writing political satire and like totally just roasting the government in Boston at the time. A 13-year-old, like writing extremely, witty columns for his brother's newspaper, anonymously. I like to think that, Franklin was like the first anon in America. There's this big like movement on X and Twitter, like anonymous writers. Franklin was the first one to do that in America. He would even create like conflicts between characters that he would make up, and they would write to the paper and complain about the other person. And it was just this teenager, Ben Franklin, at home writing these stories. So from a young age, he's exhibiting this incredible creativity. And he had a method, though. Like, this wasn't necessarily something that he was just born with. And that's what's cool about this. You read about how he committed himself to self-improvement. He would take a paper or an essay, and he would read it. And then he would not look at it for 3 days. He would sit down and try to recreate the essay and hit all the main points in his own form. And then he would compare the two. He would compare and contrast. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? And then he would scrap it, do it again. So this is a man who is constantly refining and sharpening his axe. He would take an essay and then read it, set it aside, turn it into poetry, and then take that poetry, turn it back into prose. So he's constantly playing these games with himself, with his own mind, to make himself a better writer. So, just a very practical, like nitty gritty type of guy. You know, one of the big words, maybe I'll use this whiteboard. One of the big words that describes Franklin industry. An extremely, extremely industrious man. And he was not afraid to show it. In fact, he wanted other people to see him working hard. And we'll get to some of those stories when he's in Philadelphia. But extremely industrious, just an incredible work ethic. Another interesting note about his family, you know, back in England, this is during the Protestant Reformation, he includes this note in the letter to his son about how his grandfather would have a Bible nailed to the underside of a stool in the house. And to read the Bible to his family, he would sit, turn the stool over, read it, and then when the representative of the church, whoever that would have been, was perusing the neighborhood, he would turn the stool over, hide the Bible, everything was cool. Just an interesting little tidbit there. So we have a teenage Ben Franklin who is a servant, signed into indentured servitude in Boston, Massachusetts. Pretty much what happens is his brother is publishing these anti-governmental pamphlets, and I think Ben was writing many of them, and his brother gets thrown in jail for a month, thrown in prison for a month for criticizing the government. And Ben keeps the paper going while he's in prison. And then when he gets out of prison, he's essentially told, like, you have to shut this paper down. And him and Ben think about it, and instead of shutting the paper down, they just move the paper into Ben's name. And during this process, they were going to rewrite up Ben's papers of servitude. Essentially, the old papers get nullified, but Ben kind of seizes the window between the nullification of the previous papers and the commencement of the new papers. And he actually decides, I'm going to go ahead and get out of this whole situation. And he actually writes, there's a few times in this autobiography where he confesses that these were errors that he made in his life. And he confesses that this whole sneakiness about this contract was one of the first errata of his life, as he puts it. So he decides, all right, I'm going to get out of here. And he ends up going to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He's 17 years old. He has pretty much just the clothes on his back and a chest with some other clothes. Hardly a penny to his name at 17 years old in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And what he does is he essentially just gets right to work. He finds a printing shop, immediately becomes busy. Finds a printing shop, doesn't waste any time, and starts to develop a reputation in Philadelphia as being an extremely hardworking young man. Not a bad reputation to have, and he's constantly referring to the benefit of reputation and character in regards to being industrious. It's like he didn't want anybody to think that he was screwing off. He always wanted people to know that he was working, and he had a social circle of men who were willing to help him and give him opportunities because he had that character. So that's important. So he's in Philadelphia, and it's actually funny. So when he gets off the boat in Philadelphia, he's walking down the street, and there's this house, there's the Reed family, and there's this girl standing out in her doorway. And Ben writes about how he was walking down the street with a loaf of bread under his left arm, a loaf of bread under his right arm, and a loaf of bread in his hand. And he walks past the Reed's house, and Miss Reed would become his wife years later, coincidentally. But he writes about how he felt like he must have made a most ridiculous appearance walking down the street with these loaves of bread. Little comments like that. He's a quirky writer, he's a quirky guy. So it's kind of funny. Who's been screwed over before in business? Surely somebody, right? Okay. So he becomes friends with the governor, and the governor essentially says, hey, you got to go to London, meet all these printers in London. I'll send you a letter of recommendation, and you'll go and get a ton of experience, and you can bring it back to America. So he's like, all right, sounds good. He goes to London, and when he shows up, there's no letter of recommendation for him from this governor in the mail. So he would spend the next 18 months in London. He's around 19 years old at the time, 18 months in London. He shows up knowing absolutely nobody, except for one guy who rode over there with him. He shows up, there's no letter of recommendation. The governor of Pennsylvania totally screwed him over. But he gets right to work, making friends, figuring out, what he can do to create an opportunity. He gets involved with a print shop, and he would be over there for 18 months. It's just crazy. Like, you're not getting on Facebook and like finding like, printer meetup group. And like, let's go get an opportunity. Like, he's just hitting the streets, shaking hands, meeting people. So he writes about how his time in London, he didn't necessarily improve his fortune, as he put it, but he made a lot of great acquaintances and he read a lot. He's constantly referring to reading as a consistent habit throughout his life. In fact, he mentions that he cannot remember a time when he could not read. He says that explicitly. That he says, I must have been able to read very young because I cannot remember a time when I couldn't. So for Ben, reading is a very, very important habit of his. So he's in London. He comes back to London, and he's 21, 22. He's back in Philadelphia, and his printing business starts to become more popular. He's in a deal with this one guy, leaves that deal, gets into a deal with another guy, a partnership with a little bit more equity. And essentially, his social reputation starts to pay off. He's got friends who get him a job printing currency for the state, which is great. That same friend gets him a gig printing the government pamphlets in the proceedings of the House. So you start to see where this like social credit that he was kind of building up, not the social credit system like China, but like real social credit, like, relationships. It all starts to kind of come back to him. And people start to bring him these opportunities. So one of the cool things that is really inspiring to me, so actually our study club is inspired by this group that Ben Franklin started in Philadelphia. Is anybody familiar with Junto? So this is cool. So the Junto group, so Ben Franklin started this group called Junto. And it started with like 5 or 6 guys, and they were of all sorts of different professions. But they would essentially meet up once a week on like a Friday evening, and they would write papers, they would, read poetry, they would debate, they would do all sorts of things like this. And it became a pretty popular group. There were a few chapters that popped up, but it was essentially his like secret society of how can we make ourselves better and become smarter. And they would challenge each other to write essays. They would, again, compose poetry, read poetry, have poetry contests. It's kind of a neat group. This group also put together the first public library in the area. So they were like, hey, owning books are expensive, but if we put all of our books together, it gives us more options. So they kind of create this group library. And that way everybody has access to more books, the ones that they may not own. So Junto is really cool, and that is the inspiration for our study club that we do on Wednesdays in Nashville, is this Junto group. And he writes about how just the incredible people that he meets through hosting these meetups, and how much it improved his life. So we're really seeing like this habit of like really intentional self-improvement and social cultivation. Like not accidentally, but really setting a plan for himself. In fact, I'll go back a few years on the boat ride from London back to Philadelphia. He's 20, 21. He writes about how he sat down on that boat ride, and as he puts it, he composed a plan for the future conduct of his life. I have not read that plan. I don't know if it's out there. I haven't really looked for it. But 21-year-old man on his way back from London sits down and composes the plan for his conduct in life. And he says that he stuck to it pretty well. So this is an incredibly intentional guy. So, you know, his 20s, it's essentially the story of, again, industry, just working hard and being gritty. He writes about how late at night he's working with his blinds open because when guys are coming back from the tavern, he wants them to know that he's working. And he writes about this. He wanted to not only have the habit of industriousness, but he wanted to abstain from any sort of perspective of the contrary. He wanted to work hard, and he wanted there not to be a chance that people thought he was not working hard. So he'd be up late at night, working in his window. Everybody's walking past, going about their business, and there's Ben working. And this image that he created just keeps bringing him business opportunities. Like, people start to trust this guy. He also starts a stationery shop at one point, and he writes about how when he goes and picks up his paper from the dock, or wherever he gets it, I think it was the dock, instead of taking the shortest route to the stationery shop, which is like on a side road, he went down with the wheelbarrow down the main street with all the supplies, because he wants people to see what he's up to, and he wants people to know that he's working hard. So it's interesting. It's a different culture, right? Because you have like the culture of leisure, and especially nowadays, like social media, it's all about just like, you know, kind of not looking like you're working. I think it's like a French-Italian thing too. It's like the appearance of like complete leisure in life. There is this like aristocratic type of lifestyle that people want to portray. But no, Ben wanted to work hard, and he was not afraid to let everybody know that he was working very, very hard. So pretty much, he just stays persistent. The way he writes it, he writes that, what was it, steadfast? I think I wrote it down here somewhere. I like kind of pointing out the language that he uses. Here you go. By steady industry, he improves his life and grows in influence. So by steady industry, this is a guy who really just does not let up the gas. So he really starts to build a lot of wealth. As he's coming up into his 40s, he starts printing Poor Richard's Almanac. Is anybody familiar with Poor Richard's Almanac? So Poor Richard's Almanac, it was a farmer's almanac, and it was essentially a compendium of practical, like agricultural information, but also like witty, moral parables and things like that. And he's back to writing these anonymous stories. There's like Father Abraham and Silence Dogood and like these characters that he's creating. And the Farmer's Almanac makes him a lot of money. So, and he writes that finally he had secured a fortune that afforded him the leisure of philosophical amusement. So to him, the wealth was not the ends in itself. The wealth was a means to put himself into a philosophical life, which is important, you know. So Ben he makes a lot of money with the Farmer's Almanac, and then also around this time, a few years later, I think he's going to be in his 50s when he starts doing the electrical experiments. I mean, there's just so many stories about this guy. I would have to be up here forever. And I have no idea how long I've been talking so far, but I'm going to keep going. You know, Ben would create is anybody familiar with the harmonica? Not the harmonica, but the harmonica. So the harmonica is a musical instrument. If you take a spindle and you take a glass bowl and you put a series of glass bowls along a spindle or an axle, and it rotates, and you wet your fingers, kind of like with a wine glass, right? So this axle is rotating, and there's like 15 or 16 glass bowls on this axle. And you wet your fingers, and you just hold your fingers on the various rims to create different sounds. This was an instrument that Benjamin Franklin created. And if I'm not mistaken, Beethoven wrote music for this instrument. I think it was Beethoven. It may have been a different famous composer, but I'm pretty sure it was Beethoven. But yeah, Ben Franklin creates a musical instrument, and Beethoven composes music for it. He's also a scientist. So, really what propelled Franklin to worldwide fame was his invention of the lightning rod. So, lightning was an act of God. It is burning down churches, it's killing people. There's like no way whatsoever to control this crazy thing that happens where lightning. I mean, imagine not knowing what this stuff is and like you're in a lightning. It's crazy, right? Like we saw some last night, and it's like very ominous if you had no idea what was going on. So, lightning was this force of God, and Benjamin Franklin figures out that you can, ground a building, and you can reduce lightning strikes. And there's this beautiful portrait by Benjamin West. I should have probably done a PowerPoint so I could show you, but we'll just have to look it up later. There's this beautiful portrait by Benjamin West of Benjamin Franklin, and he's sitting in his black suit, and he's holding, I think it's a key, and lightning is striking the key, and it's just this very heroic image. So Ben becomes the man who tamed the gods in many people's eyes. He figured out a way to tame lightning, and he becomes famous around the world for this invention. This is the invention that really propels him to worldwide fame. And yeah, so essentially after that, as we know, he's involved quite heavily in the American Revolution. At first, he actually was not the biggest revolutionary. His son, up until Ben's death, his son was actually a pro-Brit. So there was a breakup that happens with Ben and his son at that time. But Ben is really kind of like we think of the founding fathers. Ben is like the founding grandfather. He was much older than the other founders. Ben is at the signing of the Declaration, Ben's in his late 70s, if not 80 years old. There's some meetings where he's got gout so bad that they carry him in a chair because he's so fucked up and so old. So Ben is the founding grandfather of the United States. It was him, Jefferson, and Adams who were our delegates in France. And, I'd like to think that I could sit down. I would love to sit down at that table and ask them questions, but I don't know if I would have questions worthy of asking them. To sit with Jefferson, Franklin, and Adams would be quite an experience. Probably one of the most brilliant. What's the word? Triumvirate. Is a Roman word for
Triumvirate.
Triumvirate. One of the most brilliant triumvirates in human history is Franklin, Jefferson, and Adams. Franklin essentially goes over to France and secures money for the American Revolution. Jefferson's a Francophile as well. And Franklin's just the practical guy, like Adams is this like super uptight, stick in his ass type of Yankee. Jefferson is this like airy, aristocratic philosopher type. And Ben is just as brilliant as he is the social, relatable, like down to earth type of guy, And I think that there's something really, really interesting about that in how brilliant he is, with how practical and pragmatic, and not, with his nose up in the air type of guy. So I think that there's a really valuable lesson there. So, really in closing, this really is the main point of learning about Ben is like hard work pays off, and Ben worked hard and he wanted other people to know he was working hard. I often think about and read about the idea of reputation and character. It's kind of this common theme nowadays where it's like, don't care what people think. I think it's actually very important that a small group of people do think highly of you. I think we need to neglect the opinions of 90% of the people who we know. But I think that 10% who we respect, who we admire, like understanding that building a reputation in their eyes is something that's valuable for us. and Ben was quite aware of that. So yeah, Ben would die. He died in 1790. He was the founder of the American Philosophical Society. He was the founder of, I believe it was called the Pennsylvania Academy at the time, which is now the University of Pennsylvania. Just a man whose list of accomplishments goes on and on and on and on in so many different fields. And he came from nothing, and he was down to earth, and he just worked hard, and it worked out for him. So he's somebody that I admire a lot. And with that being said, if anybody has any questions about Ben, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes.
Didn't he invent the catheter?
I don't know, but
I'm
probably.
pretty sure, yeah.
He was a pervert. So.
Yeah.
Speaking of, what about the Hellfire Clubs? What can you tell us about the Hellfire Clubs?
I don't know much about the Hellfire Clubs, but yeah, Ben, he was he was like interested in the esoteric side of life, right? So he's a philosopher. He was, apparently in some group in France, I believe, the Hellfire Clubs, where they would throw parties in caves. I'd be down to throw a party in a cave. It sounds cool. I don't really know what all they did. I don't know much about it, but there's controversy about it. He also had this apartment in London, I think it was, and a few years ago, like, they find these skeletons in the garden, and they think Ben was like a serial killer. I think his roommate or his student was studying anatomy, is my understanding of what that was. So I don't think Ben's a serial killer. But yeah, I should learn more about the Hellfire Club. I heard it's interesting.
How many kids did he have, legitimate or illegitimate?
I think 2 or 3. Not many.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't recall him having a big family. I do remember, I think he did have an illegitimate son and one, I think maybe 2. One legitimate, one illegitimate. Any other questions on Ben?
You just said he was a pervert.
Yeah, so hey, air baths. Anybody know about air baths? So
Sounds like a good time.
So Ben Franklin had this habit in France of essentially opening up his windows and standing in the sunlight in the draft, butt-ass naked, in his Parisian apartment. And he would take air baths. This is a thing that he was into. So he would stand there in the sun and the wind would hit him, and that was...
But you're telling me Ben Franklin was sunning his balls.
Ben Franklin was sunning his balls.
Raising his team was sunning his balls.
Yeah, way
Wow.
way before Twitter was here. He was the original Anon and ball tanner.
Wow.
So there's a very strong correlation between those two.
Very strong correlation. But yeah, the air baths were certainly something that we will not be doing at Meriwether Academy. But at your own home, do what you want. Just don't get caught.
So to be fair, by French standards, that's not.
Well, if Ben Franklin's the man, like if you look up in Ben Franklin's butt naked in his window, you're probably gonna be like, well, it's Ben Franklin. So he probably knew what he was doing. Yeah, he was something else.
How do you think you got invited to the Hellfire Club, right?
Yeah, there you go. They're like,
Presenting.
yeah.
He played up being a frontiersman in Paris, right? Like to wear like
Yes.
skin caps and stuff like that to like balls.
He was so great. So here's some other cool stories. So yeah, he did spend some time on the frontier. He led a military group to construct a fort at one point in somewhere up near Michigan. Maybe it was on the frontier of Pennsylvania. And again, like he has this habit of writing morally, right? So there's like always a lesson in his stories. So he writes about how when he was out there building this fort, on the days when it was sunny and everybody is working, the evening time, everybody's having a blast, they're partying, they're having a good time, there's no quarrels. But on the days when it was raining and nobody was working, those were the days when people fought. And he has this whole message of like, working hard, like sitting around is just nothing but trouble. But yeah, so he did spend some time on the frontier. But yeah, when he was in France, he would wear these coonskin caps to essentially play up the image of the American frontiersman. And he was a fashion trendsetter. He was known for that.
Did he reconcile with his son? Do you know?
I don't believe so. Any other questions? Yeah.
Did he pay too much for a whistle?
Oh yeah, he's got another great paper. It's actually in the back of this book. It's a quick like 2 or 3 page read. It's an essay, again in the form of a letter actually, called "The Whistle," where he's writing about how he tells this story about how when he was a kid, he's walking down the street and he sees this shop selling whistles, whatever it was, and he spends all this money on a whistle, and then he doesn't have money to buy what he was actually out looking to get. And then he goes into this whole like moral, philosophical idea of not sacrificing for the distractions in life. It's a great read. It's in the back of this. I would encourage you guys to read
Beautifully
it.
written.
Huh?
It's beautifully written.
Yeah, and it's a letter, right?
It's funny, it's witty, it's like.
Yeah, imagine just like getting that letter from somebody. It's like, oh shit, we published this. So yeah, it's great. Any other questions on Ben? So what we'll do now is, what time is it?
10 after 11.
10 after 11. So let's just take a 20-minute break, and then we'll talk about Meriwether Lewis.